Welcome back. Today we will talk about the ways the European Union is trying to promote the energy transition. The learning objectives for today are to recall the main agreements and plans in the EU to combat climate change and to distinguish the different ways policy is used to stimulate the energy transition. The energy transition is an active topic nowadays, and it's become clear that the many aspects of the energy system have to change to put a hold on climate change. So, what are some of these policies that promote the energy transition? The Paris Agreement is maybe one of the most famous. Here the topic of the energy transition started to get momentum. Over 170 countries, including the European Union, signed the agreement to keep the increase of global warming well below 2 degrees, but preferably try to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This agreement was later signed and ratified by more and more countries to a level where almost all the countries in the world joined. This agreement was quite general, in order to convince all the countries to sign. The EU therefore created a more specific and elaborate plan to combat climate change, called the Green Deal. Here they stated that they want to make the European Union completely climate neutral in 2050. The goal of climate neutrality was then applied into EU legislation through the climate law, which also sets the target for reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by 55% in 2030 compared to 1990 levels. The Fit for 55 package then stated how to reach this goal of reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by 55%. Following the Paris Agreement, every 5 years all the countries, so not just the EU, need to create a nationally determined contribution plan, an NDC. So, 6 years after the Paris Agreement, the Glasgow Climate Summit started, 1 year later due to the COVID-19 pandemic, where these NDCs and new plans were discussed and agreed upon. The most notorious outcomes were the goal to keep the increase in temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius instead of 2 degrees, and the plan to phase down the use of coal. To look more closely at how these goals are realized, we'll be going over some important implementations. In the EU, we have what is called Emission Trading System, or EU ETS. Here, carbon emissions that are emitted by energy producers or industrial factories are taxed per ton of CO2. You buy these emission rights in advance, so that if you reduce your actual emissions, you can sell the remaining rights back to the market. The total amount of CO2 rights is also capped at a certain level. This way, the EU can slowly decrease the cap to support the transition towards net zero CO2 emissions. The fact is that there's a market created specifically for CO2 emission rights. This means that if the EU reduces the cap, prices increase if demand stays the same. Or, if demand decreases due to, say, environmental improvements, the price decreases, which can be a trigger for the EU to reduce the overall cap. However, not all sectors produce CO2 emissions are included in this trading system. For example, most cars produce CO2 when fuels like petrol are burned. But a car owner doesn't have to buy these emission rights. Therefore, some countries within the EU also have a nationally carbon tax, or CO2 tax. Here you pay a fixed tax for the negative externalities that CO2 has on the environment. These are for sectors not included in the EU ETS and therefore not variable, as there is no market. The amount of the tax depends per country and how it is implemented. To overcome these additional taxes or emission right prices, some companies shift their production facilities to other countries with less strict environmental rules. This way, they reduce cost and can still sell to the European consumers by exporting it from these countries to the EU. So, to overcome these environmentally untaxed goods, a carbon border tax can help. The EU proposed a carbon border tax for several goods that produce high levels of CO2, like steel and aluminium. The way the negative externalities for CO2 emission are still paid for. A positive side effect of this tax is that there are fewer job losses in the EU, as offshoring is less beneficial due to the extra cost of this tax. Legislation more focused on the energy sector often try to boost the level of renewable energy in the overall sector. This can be done by setting a minimum level of renewable energy that must be supplied in total, or a minimal number of renewable infrastructure that must be present or be built. Other ways can be the subsidization of research on renewable energy or a decrease in taxes compared to fossil fuel energy. Creating, stimulating legislation and removing barriers helps in the wider adoption of renewable energy and therefore the energy transition. A different way to promote renewable energy is the creation of awareness of the needed energy transition. This way, the consumer might demand renewable energy as another criterion aside from price. Therefore, companies focusing on this market segment can have a larger market share than initially expected on their price. And the overall level of renewable energy supply is increased due to the higher demand. Renewable energy can have issues regarding intermittency. That is why policy improving the security of supply of energy are then also needed for the energy transition. By connecting the energy networks of different countries, you can better overcome these issues. An example can be the lack of wind at certain moments in time in the Netherlands. Then fossil fuel plants might be needed to still fulfill the electricity demand. However, the Dutch electricity network is connected to the German network, which is also connected, for example, the French network. The lack of wind in the Netherlands can then overcome by solar and wind energy from France and Germany. They can supply this energy to the Netherlands as they might not have this intermittency at this moment of time. The infrastructure integration also means that energy markets must be integrated. By extending the network, you reduce the need for fossil fuel plants in moments of intermittency, but it also helps for stable supply of energy in moments of crisis. The supply of energy is therefore better guaranteed if cables or generation facilities break down due, for example, environmental problems. Extreme weather is more prone to happen due to climate change and is therefore another reason why networks are being expanded and connected within the EU. Policy focused on creating awareness increases the public acceptance towards renewable energy projects. An extra step than just public acceptance is a social empowerment of the public. Investing in renewable energy stimulates the transition. Therefore, investments from citizens or energy communities in renewable technologies contributes to a more decarbonized and flexible energy system. Energy communities take the form of a legal entity, an association, partnership, non-profit organization, etc. And they can act as a player in the energy market. They can together buy technologies on a larger scale and then act on an equal level with the other large market actors. This social empowerment is promoted in the European Climate Pact, which tries to connect, share knowledge, and develop, implement, and scale up solutions. So, we have looked at how the goals of the European policy are tried to be realized. Some try to directly reduce emissions, while others try to increase the total share of renewable energy. Accompanied, should there be ways to improve the security of supply by integrating energy infrastructure and markets. Also, the influence of social empowerment is discussed. Thank you for watching.